Marvel. Start to create Hydra. Chapter 1. 1995, El Sugiso. Elsterdam Elementary School, first floor boys' toilet. Gabri, it's your turn. A strong little boy with a serious face handed a knife in his hand to a chubby boy named Gabri. Gabri hesitated, reached out and took the knife, and even the fat on his face trembled nervously. Clark, do you really want to do this? Can't we just give a high five or shake a hand or something? Quote. Gabri slowly gestured around his left hand with the knife, but finally failed to muster the courage to cut his finger. Hurry up. Kyle and Ian have already done it. Now it's just you. If you're afraid, let me help you. Quote. With that, the little boy named Clark stepped forward. Nope. I'll do it myself. I can. Quote. When Gabri heard that Clark wanted to help him, he was so frightened that cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He gritted his teeth and stomped his foot, plucked up the greatest courage, and used the knife in his hand to cut a small hole in the tip of his finger. A drop of red blood suddenly gushed out. Hurry up. Kyle on the side urged him. He was thrusting his finger, and there was also a small hole in the tip of his finger, which was obviously cut with a knife earlier. I know, I don't need your reminder. Gabriel glared at him, then put his scratched finger on a plastic bowl on the sink in front of him. Tick. A drop of blood dripped into the bowl with gravity. At this time, the original clear water in the bowl has turned a faint red. After dripping, Gabri glanced at Kyle and Ian, put his finger in his mouth, and looked pained. Okay, give me the knife. Clark said. Gabri handed it over. Grabbing the knife, Clark cut the tip of one of his fingers without the slightest hesitation. After dripping a drop of blood into the bowl, he folded the knife and put it in his pocket. Okay, now let's start fighting for blood. Clark said with a very serious expression. When the three little boys heard this, they immediately took out the small note prepared in advance from their trouser pockets and read it aloud according to the contents of the note. I, Gabriel Kyle Ian, volunteered to accept Boss Clark's invitation to join the Hydra family. From then on, he was born a Hydra person. Death is the dead man of Hydra. Quote. When the three finished reading, Clark laughed and applauded. Very good, now I am the leader of the Hydra Grand Commander, welcome you to join. Clark shook hands with the three in turn. I now announce that from this moment on, the new Hydra has officially been established. Applause. The three little boys did not dare to disobey, and quickly clapped their hands and applauded. Boss. Clark interrupted what Ian was about to say and corrected, remember to call me Grand Commander in the future. Quote. Yes, Grand Commander. Ian quickly changed his tone and asked, that, Grand Commander, can we go back to the classroom now? It's almost time for class. Quote. Kyle and Gabriel also looked at him in unison. Okay, let's all go back, remember to gather at the old place after class, I will announce our first action of Hydra at that time. Clark waved his hand and let the three go back. When the three little boys heard this, they immediately felt like they had been amnestied, and after answering the call, they quickly ran out of the toilet. Cut. In a hurry, it is destined to be difficult to achieve big things in the future. Quote. Saying that, Clark first poured out the blood in the plastic bowl, originally to drink the blood, but Clark did not have this proclivity, so he omitted this step. Throwing the plastic bowl that had lost its value into the trash, Clark slowly swallowed his hands in his pockets and walked out of the toilet and towards the classroom. On the way, Clark recalled everything that had happened in the past 8 years. 8 years ago, Clark was originally just a street writer in another world of Washaw, living on a small salary every month, and then suddenly one day he woke up and found that he had come to a strange place, and his body had become an infant baby. Familiar with various crossing routines, he immediately realized that he had crossed over. Subsequently, he quickly understood his current situation. A baby who was only a few months old died in a traffic accident. To make matters worse, the couple did not have any relatives, so no one could adopt Clark and was sent to an orphanage. At the orphanage, Clark lived for 4 years. It wasn't until he was 5 years old that he was adopted by a kind couple. Clark's original name was Clark Weeks. Joe is his last name, his father is Chinese, and his mother is a native of El. After being adopted, Clark had a new surname, Kent. However, the kind Kent couple still retained his original surname in order to take care of Clark's emotions, so Clark's name became Clark. Weak. Kent. The original surname became a middle name, which is a kind of memorial. Since then, Clark has settled into his new family. The Kents originally had a daughter, 2 years older than Clark, named Abigail Kent. However, a few years after Abigail's birth, Mr. Kent lost the ability to reproduce due to an accident. The couple had always wanted to have another child, so they adopted Clark. Although not biological, the Kents treat Clark no different from their biological ones, and at first Clark was difficult to accept the so-called adoptive parents, but after several years of getting along, he also slowly accepted the kind couple. As a traverser, Clark certainly also has his golden finger. His gold finger is a thing called destruction system. This system does not seem to have too high intelligence, only mechanically answers some questions, and the main function of the system is to let Clark go crazy to destroy everywhere, and then the system will give a certain reward according to the degree of influence of the event. This destruction system was awakened by Clark when he was 6 years old. There was a newbie pack at the beginning, and Clark didn't know if he was lucky or bad luck. Because the rewards in the newbie pack are completely random, and he is opening a Kryptonian template, if that's just the case, it's certainly great news. After all, how strong the Kryptonians are, Clark has already learned from movie comics in his previous life. The problem was that the Kryptonian template he got was only 0.01% fused. This means that the effect that this template can have on Clark is only 1/10,000th of the complete effect. If this were just an ordinary world, Clark had already learned through the TV news when he was in the orphanage that there was a company called Stark Group in this world, and the owner of the company was called Howard Stark. But Howard Stark died when Clark was 5 years old, and Clark vividly remembers that year. Almost half of the year's newspapers were reporting some news about the Stark Group. In addition, Clark also learned that there really was a Captain America in this world during World War II. In other words, this world is not the ordinary modern world. It's the Marvel Universe. In the Marvel world, what is the use of a Kryptonian template with only 1 in 10,000 effects? Well, it can't be said useless. But there is definitely no way to let Clark have the strength of the extinction level like the Clark in DC Next Door. And that's exactly what happened. Clark spent 3 years and spent a lot of time basking in the sun every day. But for 3 full years, Clark only gave his 9-year-old self slightly more physical qualities than adult men. What a car with one hand and chopping the earth with one kick. That's not even thinking about it. Fortunately, this is not an unsolvable problem. In addition to giving Clark a newbie package at the beginning, the destruction system's main function is mainly to destroy points. Sabotage points are a currency that Clark rewards the system after performing sabotage. It can be used directly to strengthen various functions of the body, as well as to strengthen existing abilities. However, the Kryptonian template requires high points. Even a 0.01% increase requires 1,000 destruction points. Clark has been too young over the years, and although he has also done a lot of damage, it is all a small trouble. The points accumulated are only 900 points. It's a full 100 points away from 1,000 points. In addition, the destruction system rewards an annual bundle on the first day of each new year. The contents of the annual package are also random. It could be an item, it could be some ability, and of course it could be some destruction points. So far, Clark has received 3 annual packages, of which the 93 annual package is a uniform, the uniform of Superman in the movie Man of Steel. The system also thoughtfully added a zoom in and out function, otherwise Clark, who is only 9 years old this year, would not be able to wear such adult clothes. In addition, the color can also be chosen by Clark himself. He didn't like the original blue-red combination, so he changed it to a black and silver combination. The S logo and cape and shoes were silver, and the rest were black. In the year 94 of the following year, the annual gift package opened a Wolverine's self-healing ability. This ability actually overlaps with the ability of the Kryptonians themselves, but it is very practical for the current Clark. The third year 95, which is this year, Clark unleashed the shape-shifting ability of a witch from the third annual pack. The abilities that were opened twice were related to mutants, making Clark wonder several times whether the system was hinting at something. Fortunately, he checked on the internet that there are no mutants in this world. So most likely, this should belong to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, not the comic book universe. This is undoubtedly good news for Clark. After all, there are too many bigwigs in the comic universe, and they can't be restarted at every turn, which is really unbearable. 3 years classroom doorstep. Clark walked slowly in with his hands in his pockets, just in time for the teacher to enter the door. This was a math class, and the teacher was a middle-aged fat woman with thick glasses, and when she entered the door, she frowned and looked at Clark, who had not yet reached her seat and sat down, and looked a little displeased. Okay, all seated, let's start class. The student, who was still talking quietly, immediately quieted down. At this time, Clark, who had just sat down, suddenly sounded a mechanical system prompt in his mind. Fake the Hydra organization, destroy the reputation of the Hydra organization, destroy the points plus 100 points. Closing square bracket. Hearing the prompt in his head, Clark's eyes suddenly lit up. Good fellow. Gave 100 points at once, make a Hydra so much influence. Quote. This even Clark himself did not expect. After all, he originally set the name of the organization as Hydra, firstly, out of a bad taste, secondly, because he felt that the name was in line with the purpose of the organization, and finally he thought about whether he could touch the porcelain Hydra and fish out some destruction points. Unexpectedly, I also received an unexpected surprise. Over the years, Clark has also figured out the approximate way to destroy the system to settle points. He is primarily judged by influence. The higher the impact of the destruction event, the more points will be given. Clark used to play tricks, so the points he got every time were almost single-digit. This time touching the porcelain Hydra, even if the Hydra organization he founded is still not famous, only a few people know about it, but it directly gave 100 points. Clark noticed that the system's prompt mentioned destroying the reputation of the Hydra organization. He thought about it, probably because he chose to establish the Hydra organization in a place like the men's toilet, so he was judged by the system to destroy the reputation of the Hydra organization. I'm a genius. Clark was secretly pleased. After getting these 100 points, Clark's destruction points finally reached 1000 points. Name: Clark. Weak. Kent. Gender: male. Age 9 300s. Wolverine's self-healing ability increased plus Kryptonian template boost. Already owned template. Kryptonian template 0.01% plus. Already possessed abilities. Stellar Energy passive, from Kryptonian template, Super Self-Healing passive, Wolverine version, Magic Transformation, active, which version? Destruction points. 1000 points. This is the basic information panel of the system. Compared to the last time I saw it, there is an extra plus sign after the Kryptonian template. Clark thought to click on this plus sign. Do you consume 1000 destruction points to improve the Kryptonian template? Confirm. The next moment, 1000 points are cleared to 0. The Kryptonian template fusion has also increased to 0.02%. Clark's seat in the classroom is by the window, and the sunlight outside can directly shine on him, and at this time, after the Kryptonian template is raised, his most intuitive feeling is, the sun shines more comfortably on the body, as if the cells of the whole body are cheering for it. After half a lesson, it's not as simple as just doubling. Feeling some subtle changes in his body, Clark realized that his previous understanding of the Kryptonian template was still too one-sided. Even if it is only increased by 0.01%, the effect can be by no means as simple as doubling. This improvement is at least 10 times or so. Good, that's how it should be. Clark secretly clenched his fists, feeling the age-inappropriate power contained in his body. A moment later, he tried again to improve the Kryptonian template. The system still indicates that there are not enough points, and 1000 points are required. The number of points consumed has not increased, which is good news. Clark smiled. Math class is the last class this morning, and Elsterdam Elementary School has 7 lessons a day, 3 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. At the end of the third class in the morning, it was already 10:35, and at this time the students had 25 minutes of free time, and then lunch began at 11:05 until 11:35. After class, a corner of the school playground. The newly formed Hydra organization is holding its first meeting here. Clark's 3 younger brothers, Gabriel, Kyle, and Ian sat directly on the floor, listening to the first task that Clark in front of them organized for them. Everyone knows that Hydra is an evil organization. This is no secret. The existence of Hydra has also been reported by countless newspapers and magazines, but people do not know that Hydra still exists after the end of World War II, not as they know, it has been eradicated. Therefore, Clark set up a Hydra organization in the school, and it will not be targeted or anything. After all, this is nothing new. People will only think that this is a sign that children are too stubborn and do not really take it to heart. Clark also took advantage of this psychology of adults. That's why he brazenly touched the porcelain Hydra. Did you all remember what I just said? Clark's gaze swept over the three little brothers in front of him. Among the three younger brothers, Gabriel is the least bold, a little bullying and afraid of hardness, facing those who are weaker than himself. He can show very strong, but in the face of those who are stronger than himself, he will shrink his neck like a quail. Kyle is the strongest of the three. His parents are fitness trainers, he likes to exercise since he was a child, and he has the best physique. Ian is a top student, he is the smartest of the three, but he is a bit black-bellied, and his personality is very unlikable. To put it bluntly, he is too proud and used to look down on others. This guy is still a rich second generation, and his family assets exceed 10 million. Remember, Grand Commander, isn't it just to wreak havoc everywhere, and recruit new people to join? Ian smiled and patted his chest and said, "Don't worry, this matter will be left to me, and I will arrange the two of them." Quote. Well, I'll give you 2 indicators a week, and if you don't meet them, you will be punished. Clark was still more at ease with Ian's ability to do things, and if it was handed over to Gabriel or Kyle, he would not be so relieved. 2 a week, little meaning. Ian said confidently. When the two talked, Kyle and Gabriel listened from the sidelines. They knew that their brains were not very good, and things like this kind of brains were left to Ian and Clark, and they were just responsible for doing it. At 3 p.m., school closes. A large group of students carrying small school bags came out of the school gate and boarded the school bus home. The residential area where Clark's family is located is not far from the school, about 4 kilometers away. While in the car, Clark met his sister, Abigail. She was sitting and chatting with the little sisters. When he saw Clark, he also smiled and waved his hand to say hello. Abigail, your brother is so cool. A girl with glasses next to her secretly looked at Clark and whispered, "Next time we have a party, or call your brother together." Quote. My brother is only 9 years old, so you shouldn't want to hit his idea, right? Abigail stared at her with a suspicious expression. How is it possible? The girl looked weak. I just think that you, as a sister, should care more about your younger brother. Quote. No, Clark ran away as soon as he came to his day off, he didn't have time. Abigail said. Hearing this, the girl had a disappointed expression. Back home, Abigail told Clark about her little sister. Clark listened with a look of surprise. Secretly, girls in Western countries are really precocious. Abigail, do you have a favorite boy at school? Clark asked curiously. Abigail shook her head with a look of disgust. No, those guys are so boring, and I promised my mother that I wouldn't have a boyfriend until high school. By the way, I heard that you pulled a few people to set up some kind of Hydra. Abigail put on the majesty of being a sister at this time. Clark, you have such good grades in school, and you are so smart, you will definitely become the elite of society in the future, but you can't learn from those street gangsters. Quote. Who taught you this? Clark looked at her strangely, and said, Don't worry, I'm just a study interest group. You know, Gabriel and Kyle are not very good, Ian and I are here to help them improve their academic performance. Quote. Then why is it called Hydra? Abigail asked, isn't that an evil organization? Quote. That's why I want to justify Hydra. Clark joked. Abigail. In the evening, the Kents also returned home from work. Mr. Kent is a senior accountant at a large company, and Mrs. Kent works as a dance teacher at a dance training class. So their family's income is not bad, and they even have some savings to invest. Lisa, John, you're back. Clark, who was sitting on the sofa watching TV, heard the movement of the door opening, leaned over, and saw the 2 people entering the door. Lisa is Mrs. Kent's name and John is Mr. Kent's name. Clark has always called them by name, never called mom and dad, mainly because he feels a little awkward. And this kind of name is very common in adoptive families like the Kent family, and it is not unusual or rise to the level of rudeness. Honey, how is it at school today? Lisa came over and kissed Clark on the cheek and asked him with a smile. Well, it's just like usual, it's pretty good. Clark nodded and replied. Clark, are you watching cartoons? John came over and sat down next to Clark. Oh. Is it a Superman animation? Does our little Clark want to become Superman too? Quote. He has the same name as me. Clark laughed and said, so I like him a lot. Quote. Mr. John laughed. Maybe we should move to Kansas. And then you buy another farm. Clark smiled. The Marvel world has DC Comics, just as the 600th world has Marvel Comics. This setting is also very interesting. Even more interesting is Clark's name, as well as his Kryptonian template. I don't know how people in this world will feel when he grows up and flies around the world in that black Superman uniform. Shouldn't you sue him for infringement? Late at night, John and Lisa were already asleep, and Abigail had fallen asleep earlier. And this time, Clark's room. A small figure got out of bed, crept open the window, and then rolled over and jumped out of the window. This drop in height on the second floor is hard for Clark. And it's not the first time he's done it. Ever since the magic transformation ability was unveiled in this year's annual pack, Clark has been running out every night to wreak havoc around the city. The system's definition of sabotage is broad. This gives Clark a lot of leeway. In the first 2 years, because of the need to take care of the problem of identity exposure, Clark has been doing small things and getting very few points. But after obtaining the magic transformation ability this year, the problem of identity exposure has been completely solved. He can finally let go. In the moment he walked out of the yard, Clark's appearance had changed from a 9-year-old boy in pajamas to a tall and strong adult man in his 20s and 30s, wearing a black trench coat. It's time to make some big moves. Clark looked up at the moonlight tonight, a meaningful smile on his lips, and then quickly disappeared into the night. Blood Rose Bar. This is located in an old neighborhood of El Chanizo, living around, or some low-income people, this kind of place, but also the most chaotic place in El Chanizo, is full of gang organizations. Sometimes in a block, there may be more than 10 gangs. Chaos. The Blood Rose Bar is the headquarters of a gang called the Skeleton Brotherhood in the surrounding area. Clark has a little grudge with this Skeleton Brotherhood. One of his younger brothers, Gabriel's mother, was harassed by members of this gang some time ago. Clark came here tonight, on the one hand, to earn destruction points, and on the other hand, to give his little brother a blow. Carrying a bucket of gasoline and a knife, Clark walked across the road. The 2 men in black who were in charge of guarding the door of the bar immediately noticed the abnormality and stopped Clark. Friend, if you want to make trouble, I'm afraid you've found the wrong target. 2 people stopped Clark, one left and one right, with fierce eyes. Clark calmly put down the gasoline drum he was carrying at this time. The next moment, the light of the knife flashed in the neon light. A member of the Skeleton Brotherhood covered his neck with one hand, his eyes widened, and he fell unwillingly. He didn't expect Clark to really dare to make a move. And so suddenly. Sorry. I just didn't hear what you were saying, can I trouble you to say it again? Quote. Clark's expression was kind, and if it weren't for the fact that there was an undead man lying at his feet, carrying a long knife dripping with blood in his hand, the other party might have gladly answered his question. And now, you lunatic. Quote. The remaining Skeleton Brotherhood member first cursed angrily, and then reached out and touched his back without hesitation, where an M1911 was pinned, but before he could pull out the gun, a swipe of knife light flashed on his retina, and the next moment a sharp pain hit, and suddenly a sense of powerlessness hit his whole body. Although your gun can't kill me, it will hurt a lot, so please die. Clark said something chilling in a calm tone. He gently pushed away the Skeleton Brotherhood member in front of him with one hand, and as the other party fell, the blood-stained blade was also pulled out of the other party's body. It's not good to be beaten up later. Clark bent down to pick up the gasoline bucket beside him and place it next to the door, before pushing it open and walking in. A few seconds later, Clark backed back. I almost forgot to touch the corpse, I really shouldn't. He bent down and recovered 2 guns and 4 spare magazines from among the 2 corpses. One is enough. Dropping one of the guns out of the magazine, Clark put all the clips in his trench coat pocket and strode into the bar again. In the bar, the loud sound of music made Clark, who had just come in, subconsciously frown. What a terrible environment. He looked around. In the dim light, there were figures everywhere, and there was a bad smell in the air, which was the smell of tobacco mixed with alcohol and various perfumes. Clark didn't like it here. He raised his hand and raised the M1911 in his hand and fired 3 shots at the ceiling. The sound of gunfire masked the loud music inside the bar. The guests who heard the gunshots screamed in fright, and many people instinctively held their heads and crouched, and their movements seemed to be very skillful. Okay, now that the entertainment program is over, if you don't want to die, get out of here for me immediately. The guests who just spend money for entertainment, how dare they continue to stay? Hurriedly it was a string of rats holding heads. Wait a minute. Clark suddenly stopped a man who wanted to run past him. I'm not from the Skeleton Brotherhood. The other party was so frightened that he sweated coldly, and his speech was a little stuttered. I know, and I recognize you. Clark pressed the muzzle of the gun to the opponent's head. Feeling the muzzle against his head, this person almost peed on the spot. He had just begged for mercy, but Clark suddenly pulled him in front of him. The next moment, gunshots. More than a dozen or 20 bullets hit this man's body in an instant. As soon as it came, it was a group of ruthless people. Clark grabbed the dead guy in his hand and rushed straight forward, and after reaching a distance, he threw his arm hard, and the body was smashed towards the other party like a thrower. Bang! 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 He emptied the bullet in the M1911 in one go, and as a result, he had never touched the gun, and only 2 bullets hit people, or the non-lethal position of the arm and thigh. MD, this marksmanship sucks. Cursing secretly, Clark, who did not have time to replace the magazine, directly threw the gun in his hand as if it were a dark weapon. Ouch! An unlucky egg was hit in the face, squatted down in pain, covered his face with his hands and screamed. Shoot! Beat him to death for me. Quote. The leader of the Skeleton Brotherhood roared loudly, and picked up a micro-punch in his hand to shoot at Clark, who rushed up. I block. Clark shouted, waving the long knife in his hand. A flash of sword light flashed. Not a single bullet was blocked. Hiss. Clark's painful facial features were distorted, but he still rushed forward and slashed at the face of a member of the Skeleton Brotherhood. This knife gave him a double eyelid on the spot. Seeing that the other party was happy, they couldn't help but cheer. Bang! 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 Gunfire continued to ring out. There were more than a dozen people on the other side, and each with a gun, that is, a dozen guns. And Clark is only one person, even if he has Wolverine's speeding self-healing ability, but these bullets hit his body, and it still hurts him to die. Clark cursed the word that began with an F while slashing 2 more Skeleton Brotherhood members to death. What kind of monster is this? Quote. The other party also scolded, and the expression on his face even had some fear. Your whole family is a monster. Clark roared and threw the other to the ground with a knife. The blade stabbed directly into the opponent's body. He grabbed the gun from his opponent's hand, and after being shot several times in the back, he rolled over and fired successively behind him. This time the distance was closer, and Clark's accuracy was noticeably improved. 3 members of the Skeleton Brotherhood were shot and fell to the ground. I knew my marksmanship wasn't that bad. As soon as Clark grinned, a bullet grazed his ear and hit the ground, and the flying gravel ran into his ear, and suddenly there was another burst of pain. Give me all death. Clark pounced again with red eyes. A few minutes later, the dying leader of the Skeleton Brotherhood fell to the ground, coughing up blood in his mouth, and looked at the man standing in front of him with resentment and horror in his eyes. Someone once said that a perfect infiltration is to kill all the enemies who find you, and I have always felt that this is very true. What do you think? The leader of the Skeleton Brotherhood on the ground opened his mouth to say something, but only spewed out a mouthful of blood, and then swallowed his last breath without blindness. It seems that you also agree with this statement. Clark stepped over the other's body and walked to the office inside the bar. A few minutes later, he was back here. In his hand, he had a black canvas bag. The canvas bag contained some of the present that he had just scraped from his office, not much, about 400,000 or 500,000. In fact, Clark usually needs to spend money in not many places. After all, He was actually just a 9-year-old child, so why did he need so much money? However, it is a traditional custom to kill people and loot. In the spirit of not taking nothing, Clark still found a canvas bag and packed the money and took it away. As for these guns on the ground, Clark couldn't see it. He wouldn't admit it, it was because his marksmanship was too bad, so he didn't think he needed it, so he didn't take it away. Walking out of the bar, there was no one outside. Those guests who ran out, no one was full to go to the police. After all, what kind of place is this? They know very well, dare to come to this kind of place to make trouble, can be the characters they provoke. In line with the principle that more is better than less, no one called the police. Just act like you haven't been tonight. Throwing the canvas bag on the ground, Clark picked up the bucket of gasoline he had brought with him and folded it back into the bar again. It didn't take long for him to fill the bar with gasoline. The spilled gasoline arrived at the door of the bar along the way, and extended a short distance before he threw away the empty gasoline barrel in his hand. Picking up the canvas bag on the ground, Clark took a few steps back, took out a windproof lighter, lit it, and threw the gasoline on the ground. Bang! The raging fire instantly spread rapidly into the bar with traces of gasoline. Clark turned away, not looking back at the bar behind him, which had been engulfed in flames. In the early morning of yesterday, a bar on Norfa Avenue broke out in a fire. After the fire was extinguished, police personnel found dozens of bodies in the fire. After identification, these are members of a local gang. Before the fire burned, all of them have died, in response to this vicious case in our city. In the morning news is broadcast on the TV in the living room. The news is about the case that happened at the Blood Rose Bar last night. Clark came down from the second floor after washing, saw the news playing on the TV, and smiled secretly. It's all on the morning news, and it seems that the movement is indeed not small. That's not bad news for Clark. The greater the movement, the more destruction points he can get in the future. It's better to make a national sensation. Well, think about it and know that it is impossible. This is not the invasion of the Zatari people in the future, and it will not make such a big movement. But even if it was just that, Clark's action this time was very rewarding. After he destroyed the headquarters of the Skeleton Brotherhood last night, the system gave a 30-point reward for destruction. As soon as he was reported by these news programs this morning, he was rewarded with 40 destruction points, which added up to 70 points both times before and after, although it was not as much as the honor of founding Hydra and destroying Hydra yesterday. But the former is not a one-time sale, and the latter, it is estimated that there will be no more gains for a long time. It is estimated that what kind of gang vendetta is, the city is becoming more and more chaotic. Mr. Kent, who was sitting in the living room, shook his head with a disappointed expression, and it was not until Mrs. Kent, who was walking over, glared at him that he found Clark standing behind him. "Did our little Superman sleep well last night?" Mr. Kent said with a smile as he switched to the station. "Well, not bad." Clark nodded. Then walked to the kitchen. "Lisa, let me help you." In a lavish manner, a dozen servants are busy pruning bushes, weeding, clearing roads, and so on. A manor of this size is also extremely rare in the entire El Sugiso. Living here is not only a symbol of money, but also a symbol of status. At this time, inside the restaurant on the first floor of the manor, an old gentleman with elegant manners was eating. At this time, an old housekeeper dressed in a straight dress slowly came over and handed over a mobile phone in his hand. "Sir," Chloe called. The old butler said. The old gentleman gracefully put down the knife and fork in his hand, picked up the napkin on the side and wiped the corner of his mouth without hurry, and then took the mobile phone and put it to his ear. "Good morning, Your Excellency Falcone." Quote. Chloe on the other end of the phone spoke respectfully. "Say it." His Excellency Falcone said lightly. "Yes, sir." Chloe immediately reported. "The matter has been clearly investigated. It was a man in a black trench coat who destroyed the Skeleton Brotherhood last night, and I have asked someone to draw it out about the appearance of the other party, but it is still unclear the origin of the other party. It does not look like it is local." Quote. "The Skeleton Brotherhood is gone, but this killer must be found. No one can break the rules I set. I will only give you a week." "Yes, Your Excellency Falcone." Kalo hurriedly replied, not daring to have any objections. Handing the phone to the old butler, His Excellency Falcone continued to enjoy breakfast. He didn't care at all about the life or death of those in the Skeleton Brotherhood. What he cared about was that someone was in his territory and broke the rules he had set, which he could not tolerate. In El Chanizo, there is no one who can break the rules set by his Falcone family without paying a price. Not before, not now, and there will not be in the past. Clark didn't know that his actions last night had offended a certain El Suji's godfather. But even if he knew, he wouldn't take it to heart. First, he has Wolverine's super speed self-healing, and ordinary weapons can't kill him at all, unless it alarms an organization like S.H.I.E.L.D., or a gangster, even if the local force is great. Second, he had done enough disguise when he acted last night, and in this era, even in a big city like El Chanizo, there are not many cameras, and it is impossible to associate a 9-year-old child like him with a murderous killer. With these two items, Clark was not worried about being targeted at all. That His Excellency Falcone wants to check, so let him check it. It's impossible to find Clark's body anyway. A corner of the school playground. Clark looked at the two guys in front of him. You want to join Hydra? Clark stared at them. Any idea what we Hydra do? Quote. It may be that the relationship that just killed many people last night made Clark's eyes more frightening than ever today, and the two boys in front of him, who will be 1 year older than him next year, almost cried out by him. I know, I can. Quote. The boy on the left plucked up his courage and stumbled. Clark nodded, not embarrassing them too much. Okay, you will follow Kyle from now on, what he says and what you do, understand? The two nodded hurriedly. Clark looked at Kyle and ordered, you bring these two newcomers, tomorrow I will accept the results, if you can't pass, kick them out directly. Quote. Kyle nodded and patted his chest and assured, don't worry, Grand Commander. I will definitely teach them well, just leave it to me. Quote. Good. Clark patted Ian's shoulder at this time and said approvingly, it's only been 1 day to recruit 2 new people, Ian, you did a good job. Quote. I'll keep up the good work. Ian was praised, and the whole person was excited. He felt that he had finally found the meaning of life. What does it mean to be a rich second generation? Only Hydra, only Grand Commander Clark, could bring this thrilling feeling to his ordinary life. Ian felt that his whole blood was boiling. For Ian's sudden and inexplicable excitement, Clark did not pay too much attention. Anyway, this guy is originally a strange guy, and he has to run to mess with him. What kind of excitement to play, and I don't know if his father will break his leg if he knows this. Okay, let's all disband. Clark waved his hand and let them disperse. When his little brothers were gone, Clark found a secluded place to sit down, basking in the sun while thinking about future plans. First of all, he definitely won't be a superhero. Anti-hero words, a little bit possible. But that's not what Clark cares about. In other words, was there any big event in 1995? Clark recalled those memories of his previous life. Although he was also a Marvel fan in his previous life, he was limited to watching some movies and TV series, comics and so on, and did not have much contact. The current world, if nothing else, should be the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If that's the case, then the big event of 1995 was the return of Captain Marvel. At the beginning, Captain Marvel is a big guy with explosive combat effectiveness, and he is a little overwhelmed. Clark muttered, but in fact he didn't think about going to trouble Captain Marvel. After all, that route is almost dead looking. But, speaking of which, where did Captain Marvel come from after he returned to Earth? Clark tried to remember, but found that he couldn't remember at all, or he hadn't paid attention to it at all. After all, the average audience watches a movie, who will pay attention to these details. It shouldn't be El Suji, right? Clark thinks it's most likely a new date. After all, that's the home of Marvel, isn't it? At midnight, deep in the dark alley, a tall figure that was blurred in the darkness slowly approached. Still wearing a black trench coat, carrying a long knife and a barrel of gasoline. Clark raised his head and looked at the factory in front of him. The factory is ostensibly abandoned, but in fact it has been converted into a processing plant for the manufacture of washing powder. Clark learned about this place through some inquiries. Tonight, he's going to destroy this place. The factory that made laundry detergent was no more guarded than last night's Blood Rose Bar, and many of them were equipped with submachine guns as weapons, which was not an easy task for Clark, who was not yet very physically strong. Treadmill. In the darkness, a sound of footsteps converged towards this side. Clark paused and looked around with a frown. Are you targeting this factory tonight? One by one, figures came out of the darkness. Bang, bang, bang. Several bright searchlights turned on, and the lights illuminated a large area as if it were day. Clark noticed that there was an extra red dot on his heart. That's a distant sniper rifle aimed at him. It's an ambush. Clark shook his head, knowing that it was because of his shallow experience, so he didn't notice that he was being followed. I don't know what to call you, stupid. Or too much conceit. Chloe sneered. You ran out without hiding it at all, really thinking that this city is a place where you can run amok. Quote. But that's fine, Your Excellency Falcone only gave me a week. If you don't come out, I'm really a little difficult to find you. Your Excellency Falcone. Clark wrote down the name. Although he had never heard of this name, he could see that these people in front of him should have been assigned by this Falco cabinet to target him. This factory is yours. Clark put down the oil drum in his hand and did not rush to start, but opened his mouth and asked. Kalahaha laughed a few times and mocked. I really don't know which country place you are a killer. Won't you go and inquire about who is in charge of this city? Quote. Not to mention that this small factory, even all the gray industries in the entire city, belong to the Falco cabinet. Only with the permission of Falcicio's cabinet can they survive. As long as the next word from Falcicio's cabinet lets them get out, they have to get out obediently. No one dares to break the rules set by His Excellency Falcone. I can't, they can't, and you can't. This is called Falcone, such a cow. The entire underworld of El Shanji is decided by him. Isn't this the Godfather? So, I'm being targeted by this His Excellency Falcone. Clark smiled and said. Don't overestimate yourself. Colo snorted coldly. You are just a little reptile, and His Excellency Falcone wants to crush you to death, and he doesn't need to do it himself. Quote. Clark nodded, not refuting Chloe's words. Because there is no point. But I can give you a chance. Colo said. Just say who told you to do this, and I can call the shots and give you a quick death. Quote. Or else. The other party looked at Clark coldly. Those people around him also pointed at him with their muzzles, their faces were cold and their eyes were mocking. Should I thank you then? Clark laughed and said. Colo's face turned cold, and with a wave of his hand, there was immediately a gunshot. Bang! The sniper in the distance directly shattered the knee of Clark's right leg with one shot. The impact of the bullet caused Clark to fall to the ground, and even the weapon in his hand fell to the side. Bring him here. Chloe ordered coldly. Immediately, two of his men stepped forward, ready to take Clark away. But just as the two approached Clark, who had originally fallen to the ground and screamed in pain, suddenly burst out, directly grabbing the neck of one of them with one hand, and taking away the pistol from his hand with the other hand like lightning. Bang! Bang! Two gunshots rang out. The first gunshot came from Clark's gun, and the bullet went straight into the neck of the other man, who fell clutching his bloody neck. The second gunshot came from a distant height. It was the previous sniper, and the bullet hit the man who was caught in the neck by Clark, and a large blood flower exploded. Bang! Clark fired a shot at a height. Knowing that his marksmanship was not good, he did not expect this shot to hit the other party, it was purely a deterrent shot. Then he turned his muzzle and fired several shots directly at these people around him. It wasn't until he finished firing the bullets in the magazine that he lost the gun. With a push of his hand, he pushed out the dead body, and with a burst of gunfire, Clark rolled on a donkey in a not very elegant posture, rolled over and picked up his weapon. Shoot him for me. Chloe's angry roar came from that side. Clark felt like he had been shot a few more times. The severe pain made his eyes red, and he was so fierce in his heart that he rushed directly against the bullet and stabbed a gunman in the chest with a long knife in his hand. It hurts so much. Clark vowed that in the future, he must spend more time in the sun, so that he can withstand bullets in flesh roux as soon as possible, so that he will not have to endure this pain anymore. This guy is a monster, right? How is it possible that someone has been shot so much and does not die? Monster. Don't you come over. Yes. Quote. Clark, who had been shot dozens of times, brandished the long knife in his hand covered in blood, harvesting the lives of these gunmen one by one. He looked like a demon crawling out of hell. It is no wonder that these people are so frightened that even the hands that fired the gun are shaking, and the marksmanship is suddenly out of standard, but it gives Clark the opportunity to fight back. Die. The knife flashed. A human head rolled down. Clark wiped the blood sprayed on his face and continued to his next target. Kill. 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 Clark had already killed the red eye. He didn't care about the sporadic bullets that hit him, he just focused on one target, and then he pounced on them like a demon, stabbing them. Gradually, even these gunmen, who had the advantage in numbers and weapons, could not hold on and began to escape. With the first one who escaped, soon the second, the third. In the blink of an eye, these gunmen who were still surrounding Clark just now ran away without a single one left. Clark didn't go after the gunman, he set his sights on the leader. Boom. As soon as a car started, a loud noise was heard, and the window glass was directly smashed from the outside, and then one hand grabbed Kalo on the driver's seat, grabbed his hair, and pulled him out of the window. Bang. Chloe's body slammed to the ground. But the pain in his body could not hide the fear in his heart. Are you afraid? Clark crouched down and looked at him. You, don't come here. Chloe struggled to crawl to the side, trying to pick up the pistol that had fallen out when he was dragged out. Poof. Ah. H. The blade pierced directly through Chloe's calf, and part of the blade plunged into the ground, making him unable to move. I'm talking to you, why aren't you looking at me? Clark looked down at him. Do you know it's rude to do this? Didn't your parents teach you? When someone is talking to you, you have to look at him. Quote. Chloe's face turned pale, both painful and frightened. You, what do you want? You asked this question well, there is no standard. Clark shook his head and said, I should have asked you this, you forgot. You found me, not you. Quote. What do you mean? Chloe asked with a trembling voice. I mean, I want to visit that His Excellency Falcone, and I wonder if this gentleman will show me the way. Clark smiled and looked at Chloe in front of him. Hearing this, Kalo was so frightened that his pupils shrank to the size of a needle's eye. You want to take revenge on Your Excellency Falcone. No, it's a visit. Clark emphasized. But how could Kalo believe his nonsense? Impossible. I will not betray under the Falco cabinet. Chloe shook his head and said. Are you so faithful? Clark smiled and leaned closer and said, or are you afraid to say it just because you're scared? Quote. Kalo's face changed. He is indeed not so loyal. In fact, which one who came out to fool around this year is not for his own interests. Loyalty. How much is that thing worth? But he didn't dare to say it. Kalo knew the horror under Falco's cabinet, and once he betrayed His Excellency Falcone, it would not only be as simple as his own death, but even his family and brothers would not be spared. You kill me. Kalo looked like he was dead. I couldn't see the scared look I had before. It's like suddenly becoming someone else. Clark stood up at this time and reached out to pull out the knife. The sharp pain made Chloe snort, but he was patient. Okay, I'll fulfill you. Clark sneered and swung the knife into Chloe's heart. Do you think if you don't say, I won't find out where this Falcone lives? Clark shook his head with a smile and turned to walk towards the factory behind him. In the factory, the people have run out. Clark carried the gasoline barrel in. A few minutes later, he returned to the outside of the factory, threw away the empty gasoline drum, took out a lighter and lit it, and casually dropped it on the gasoline marks on the ground. Rumble. The fire spread. The light of the fire reflected Clark's back as he turned away. Thundered. A violent explosion sounded, and the sky-rushing fireball enveloped the entire factory and illuminated a large area of the night sky. Wait until the police and fire alarms who received the alarm arrived here. Clark had already returned home. The next day, in the morning. In the morning news, the explosion last night was reported again. However, strangely, this time the news did not mention the words, washing powder, and manufacturing laundry detergent factory. On the contrary, it only used gang vendettas to make a conclusion. It seems that this His Excellency Falcone really has hands and eyes in the sky. Clark thought to himself while eating breakfast while watching the news on TV. Last night, Clark received a total of 2 system prompts. The first time was earlier, with only 5 destruction points. That was Clark's younger brother Kyle, who brought him the newcomer trial with the 2 newcomers. Then it's the middle of the night. Clark destroyed Chloe's ambush and blew up a factory that made laundry detergent. Earned a full 80 destruction points. Just now, when this content was playing on the morning news, Clark received another system prompt, but this time he received fewer points, only 40 points. It's the same as yesterday. In this way, in just 2 days, Clark earned 195 destruction points. Compared with the previous efficiency, it can be said that it is a great improvement. It's Saturday, so I don't have to go to school. Clark made an appointment with a few members of their Hydra organization and came out to meet at a comic shop. 2 new arrivals who joined yesterday also came. They passed yesterday's trials, so from today they are full members of Hydra. In the comic shop, Clark meets his 5 younger brothers. Grand Commander. Grand Commander. Good morning, Grand Commander. The 5 people saw Clark come in and quickly put down the comic they were flipping through. It can be seen that Clark is still very prestigious. The other customers in the shop looked at them curiously, and then shook their heads in amusement, as if remembering some memories of their childhood. Clark led the younger brothers to sit down next to them, then looked at the 2 newcomers. You did a good job yesterday, and you will continue to maintain this state in the future. The 2 newcomers nodded quickly. By the way, what's your name? Clark asked. My name is Robert. The brown-haired boy said. My name is Kakarot. The black-haired man said. Kakarot. Clark glanced at him, glanced behind him, and did not grow a tail. It seemed that it was just the same name. Kyle. Clark looked at him and ordered, in the future, Robert and Kakarot will be handed over to you to take with you, remembering the purpose of our Hydra, and I hope that in 2 months the name of our Hydra will be heard in this block. Quote. Don't worry, Grand Commander, I will definitely do as you order. Kyle patted his chest and assured loudly. Clark nodded, and then looked at Ian. Ian, you said there was an important matter before, what is it? Quote. That's it. Ian took out a piece of paper and handed it over. Clark picked it up and opened it. I heard that your Hydra organization has been very arrogant in the past 2 days. I'm Dantest, the 5th grade of St. Mary's Elementary School, the boss of the Black Viper, and if you have won, we'll see you tomorrow at 12 noon under the Cockerel Bridge, and if you dare not come, I'll take someone to visit your school. Oh, it turned out to be a war book. Clark looked interested. The other party is the Black Viper of Santa Maria Elementary School. Founded a year ago, there are more than 24 members. The eldest is Dantest, who is in the 5th grade this year, is a Taekwondo practitioner, and it is said that he once beat 5 6th graders, and is a tricky guy. Ian had already investigated the other party's intelligence and told Clark this information at this time. Very good. Clark smiled and said, this is our first battle after the establishment of Hydra. Although the other party is only a group of elementary school students, but it is still very meaningful. You all follow me at noon, we will meet this Black Viper for a while. Quote. Shall we call more people? Gabriel said with some concern. Grand Commander, you also heard what Ian said. There are more than 24 people on the other side, and we are only 6. Quote. Are you scared? Clark stared at him. Gabriel quickly shook his head in fright. But it's just a group of elementary school students. I can do it alone, and the reason why I took you here is purely for the sake of cards. Clark said, remember, we are Hydra, an organization destined to upend this world. If even a group of elementary school students are afraid, you should quit early. Quote. No, I'm not afraid. Gabriel quickly defended. It better be so. Clark stared at him for a moment before looking away. At noon, after lunch, Clark took his 5 younger brothers to the Cockerel Bridge. It's on the edge of El Suji, and the surrounding neighborhoods are gang-ridden and chaotic. There is a wide platform under the bridge, which can be reached by following the stairs on the slope. When Clark brought the people there was already a group of people here. The other party looked much taller than Clark and the others, and they were all students in the 5th and 6th grade. The leading few people squatted there and swallowed the clouds, and when they saw Clark and their people arrived, they saw only 6 people coming, and suddenly a mocking expression appeared on their faces. You are Hydra. Dantest casually threw the cigarette and stomped it out. I thought how powerful it was, so there were just a few people. I think you might as well merge into our Black Viper. Quote. The imposing group of people on the other side gathered around. There were nearly 20 people. Among them, there are some strong guys who usually like fitness at a glance. Thanks for watching.